Perfect. So thanks everyone again for registering for our first ever, at least this year, Lunch and Learn. So my name is Sarah McKenney. I'm the Director of Alumni Relations here at NSU. And on the call we have Emily, our Assistant Director, and obviously our esteemed guest, Dr. Karen Basedow. So today, we're kicking things off in celebration of Nutrition Month, and we're recognizing a very important milestone, the 10th anniversary of NSU's Masters in Nutrition program. Today, as I mentioned earlier, we are honored to have with us Dr. Karen Basedow. She's an esteemed professor, assistant professor of nutrition at NSU's Dr. Kiran C. Patel College of Osteopathic Medicine. Dr. Basedow is not only a dedicated educator and researcher, but also a certified diabetes care and education specialist with a deep commitment to improving health outcomes, particularly in underserved communities. In today's session, she will be breaking down why the Mediterranean diet has been ranked the #1 diet for 8 consecutive years by NSU News and World Report. As a panelist for their diet rankings, Dr. Basedow will share her expertise on what makes this eating pattern so effective and how it can support long-term health and wellness. So whether you're looking to enhance your nutrition knowledge, make healthier choices, or just learn something new today over lunch with us, we're really happy to have you here. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Karen Basedow.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Lunch and Learn. I think it's timely that we meet over lunch to talk about food. So I hope you'll feel free to munch, lunch, and learn. I'm going to share my screen, so just give me 1 second to share that. And let me swap my settings. Okay, I hope you have a full screen view. Okay, so let's get started. It is National Nutrition Month, and my favorite thing to talk about is food. So without further ado, let's get talking about the Mediterranean diet. So there's been a lot of buzz around the Mediterranean diet. The U.S. News and World Report has ranked this the best diet for 8 consecutive years. And there are a lot of diets to choose from. It may even be tricky to sort one diet out from the next to really understand, is it all that it's meant to be? And we're going to dive into that. So you might be wondering how U.S. News and World Report determined whether this was the best diet and what made it the best diet, thinking about journalists sitting around a table contemplating what types of food they eat and what the best diet would be, or was it a bunch of scientists? What was it polling the residents of the United States? What actually went into this? We're going to talk a little bit about that process. Do you think they voted on poll everywhere? Do you think they had to fill out ballots that went into a machine and there were hanging chads? Well, it actually was kind of seamless. They choose a panel of experts, and there were 69 experts. I was happy to be invited to participate as one of the experts. It is a voluntary role. We don't get paid for this. And so it really was nice to get to see on the inside how this all works. And so what they do is they convene a panel of experts. You are contacted by U.S. News and World, excuse me, U.S. News and World Report, and you have an opportunity to participate. There are a number of diets that are ranked. So they're looking at diets that are discussed in journal articles, scientific publications, textbooks, and they're looking for investigative journals that rank the most popular diets. And they take those diets and they use a third-party polling process, and those diets are ranked by the professionals. And so these are scientists, they're dietitians, they're medical doctors, they're people who perform research. So people who are schooled, educated, and working professionally in the nutrition world. And so There is a Likert scale that is used for the polars, and we don't do it all at the same time. We actually have time to, I did a lot of reading and review. And when we get to voting on the diets, we are looking at a percentage of the diets based on how many people have voted for these diets gets turned into a decimal, and that gets multiplied by 5. So each diet gets a score, and then they can be ranked. And this is done for rankings based on 7 lifestyle factors, and then they're looking at 13 health conditions. So there's a lot of information that goes into ranking these diets, and that's a little bit about how it's done. So today we're going to be talking about the Mediterranean diet. What are the ways that it promotes health? By the end of this session, I know you'll be able to name at least 2 ways. We're going to be looking at what foods make up a healthy eating pattern on a Mediterranean diet, and you'll be able to explain that. And you'll be able to describe ways that you can incorporate some of these key foods into your dietary practices. So let's talk a little bit about the history of the Mediterranean diet, kind of understanding where this all started. And in my research, I found out that back in the 1940s, the government of Crete actually was looking to improve the post-war diets of its citizens. And so they hired the Rockefeller Foundation to do some research, and they actually found that the diet of the Cretans was better or similar to the quality of diet in the US. Then we came along into the late 1950s and the 60s, and there was some research done by a physiologist, Ansel Keys, and his wife was a chemist. And this is known as one of our landmark studies, the 7 countries study. And it looked at risk for cardiovascular disease and dietary patterns, along with life expectancy. And so that was where we first started to identify commonalities of diets where there were low risk of cardiovascular disease and improved life expectancies. So that's the 7 countries study. The Greek word dieta is referring to lifestyle, so it's giving us a clue that it's not just about the diet. There are some similar lifestyle factors that go along with the Mediterranean diet style of eating. And I have 3 of them here: siesta, riposo, and pisolino. These, if you've traveled to Europe or to the Mediterranean, you know are practices that in the middle of the day, there's a break in the day and people go into repose, they take naps, they have a family meal, all of the businesses close, schools get out early in the day, about 1 o'clock, and you have this period of time where you have a healthy family meal. So there's some socialization going on, there's some relaxation, there's a break in the day. And so this is all also part of that pattern that we talk about. So we'll be talking a little bit more about that. So as we go on in time, in the 1990s, the Mediterranean diet food pyramid was developed, and this was it was led by Old Ways Preservation Trust, but they used the School of Public Health from Harvard along with the World Health Organization to combine resources and put together this Mediterranean diet period. And from there, around 2000, it became mainstream, and we began to talk and read a little bit more about this diet. So why are we so excited about it? It has a number of really important health benefits. So some of those health benefits you heard about: reduced cardiovascular disease. It can reduce risk for cancer, stroke, diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and I can go on. There are a number of diseases that we see that really are linked to dietary patterns. And so we'll be talking about how the Mediterranean diet can have qualities that link to prevention of all of these diseases. When we talk about women's health, there are some areas where the Mediterranean diet can also play a role: polycystic ovarian syndrome, menopause, premenstrual syndrome. These are all ways that the Mediterranean diet can reduce some of the side effects of these diseases and the discomfort of them. It also works for men's health. Thinking about men's health, Mediterranean diet can reduce risk for prostate cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetes and obesity, and stroke. And those are common things that we see in men. So looking at the Mediterranean diet compared to how we eat in the United States, that practice of our meal patterns and the types of foods we eat, we call the Western diet. So when we compare the Mediterranean diet to the Western diet, indeed what we see is the Western diet is almost a complete opposite. It's like we've flipped, in this visual, we've flipped the pyramid on its head, and we see the Western diet is almost opposite. So looking carefully, you see in the Mediterranean diet, the base of the diet, fruits, vegetables, whole grain, and olive oil. We have limited, smaller amounts of those protein foods, white meat, seafood, fish, legumes, eggs, nuts, seeds, and olives. And then the smallest amounts contributing to our diet on a Mediterranean plan are those starchy sweet potatoes, processed meats, and red meats. Well, in comparison, the Western diet is heavy in processed meats and animal proteins and desserts, sweets, or processed foods. Dairy products are moderate. We have a fair amount of refined grains. And then the smallest portion of the Western diet is actually fruits, vegetables, legumes, and whole grains. And so when we look at this in just a comparison of the types of fats, the Western diet has a lot of oils and fats in it, and it's much lower for the types of fat, like vegetable oil, for example. These are called omega-6s, and you might have heard about omega-3s. Omega-3s are really cardioprotective. They protect our heart. They can help lower our LDL, our triglycerides, and they raise our HDL, which is that healthy cholesterol. And so those healthy fats are going to be really important. So the ratio of the omega-6 to omega-3 on a Western diet is about 15 or 16 to 1. That same ratio on the Mediterranean diet is 3 or 4 to 1. So you see how the types of fats also come into play when we compare a Mediterranean diet and a Western diet. So this becomes quite important. And here's another visual I do like to talk about. Your brain on the Western diet is pictured on the right side. And the red areas are areas of high activity. It's quality brain activity. So you see there's more red for the Mediterranean diet, and then there's less for the Western diet. And for example, we know that the blood-brain barrier is susceptible to impairment by the Western diet. It causes dysregulation of the blood-brain barrier, and we begin to see changes. Those changes might translate to cognitive decline or psychiatric disorders. Cognitive decline could be dementia or Alzheimer's. So here we know that the Mediterranean diet can actually reduce the risk. So it's important to think of our food differently. We like to think of our food in the nutrition world. We like to say food is medicine, and I'm sure you've heard that before. But think about, what does that really mean? You know, think about how we can have certain items that come into our diet, these nutrients that have special qualities, like the omega-3s, things that we need for our health that are more prevalent in a Western diet than in a food that's higher in processed foods, more prevalent in a Mediterranean diet than in a Western diet. So that Western diet is not giving us all of the nutrients that we need because much are changed in processing. If we think to a quote from Thomas Edison, he says this: "The doctor of the future will give no medication but will interest his patients in care of the human frame, diet, and in the causes and prevention of disease. So indeed, what he's saying is, as we go forward, we need to recognize the value of food in caring for and preventing chronic disease. And we know that there are the highest number of chronic diseases that we die from in the United States are linked to dietary causes. That can be cardiovascular disease, diabetes, stroke, cancer. They have connections to our diet. So now we need to think of food more in terms of medicine, and choosing our foods carefully is going to be important because that will have implications. Very obviously, how we choose our food can have implications on our weight. And obesity, or carrying extra weight or adipose tissue, can lead to dysregulation of your metabolism and your glucose levels, your blood sugar levels. And so having a diet that minimizes fats that can cause stroke or collection of plaque in arteries, these are really important things. And thinking in terms of how food sustains our gut health, right? We use food and fiber in particular to feed the healthy bacteria in our gut. If we don't have enough fiber in our diet, which primarily comes from our whole grains, fruits, and vegetables, then we are causing our bacteria in our gut to also become unbalanced. And that has implications as well. Those gut bacteria that are healthy for us produce metabolites that impact our neurotransmitters, our brain health, our mood. So there are some very important connections between our diet and our brain health, and they are linked to the foods that we eat. So let's talk a little bit about what is this Mediterranean pattern, if you'd like to think about how your diet stacks up. So we did say that a Mediterranean diet is low in animal products. It is a plant-based diet. It's high in fruits and vegetables, as you would imagine. So thinking in terms of vegetables, you'd want to get 4 or more servings a day. A typical serving of a vegetable, if it's raw, would be 1 cup. If it's cooked, a half cup would count as 1 serving. So 4 or more is your goal. When we think about those people in Crete, in Greece, they're actually eating 9 or more servings of vegetables a day. When it comes to fruit, 2 to 3 fruits would be typical on a Mediterranean diet. If you are eating a fruit that we typically cube, where we don't eat the skin, like watermelon or cantaloupe, or you might even consider berries, 1 cup would be a serving. And if we are eating an apple, it would be a small apple or a small orange. For bananas, we like to think of a 5-inch banana as a typical serving size. If you're using a large banana, you'd want to cut that banana in half and count that as 1 serving. So we're looking for 2 to 3 servings a day. Again, these would be the minimum intake. Someone who has a higher calorie need would generally be eating more servings of these foods to meet their calorie needs. Going on to grains. So this is really important. The concept of including more whole grains in our diet. Often we forget how many foods in our diet are processed. You know, I go to the grocery store and I like to look in other people's carts to get a sense of who they are based on what kinds of food they're buying. But we forget that processed foods are breads and cereals and crackers, things we take for granted that are part of our daily diet. They're processed, but we're so accustomed to eating these foods that we often don't think of them as processed foods. So when we talk about whole grains, we're looking for including all parts of that plant. So for example, a wheat kernel has the bran, the endosperm, and the germ. Those 3 parts are all included in processing a whole grain. When we make white flour, we take off the bran and we take off the germ, and all that's left is that starchy portion that gets milled and bleached into flour, and that's how we get white flour. So the most important parts of the nutrients are actually taken off the plant. So that germ, I think of like the yolk of an egg. It's where the nutrients are for that plant that's potentially going to grow. And that germ, you may have heard of wheat germ, Kretschmer's wheat germ. That's the part of the plant that was removed when they were making flours. They sold it to Kretschmer's and they sell it to us again as wheat germ. Then there's the bran layer, and you may know bran from bran cereals or bran muffins. That bran layer is the outside layer where the fiber is. So when we take off the bran layer to make flour, we're throwing away that part that has the fiber. And so any products made with white flour have lost those nutrients. And so in the United States, we enrich the flour. So when you look at your bread, it says enriched wheat bread, meaning they put some nutrients back in because in the processing, many were lost. And so now when you buy your breads, you want to think of in terms of buying a whole grain bread. Do you want to see the nuts or the seeds or the flakes of the whole grain? You may see flakes of oats in there. You may see the little hull from the bran. That's the type of whole grain product you want to buy. Other whole grains that you may be familiar with, quinoa, which is becoming quite popular, that's a whole grain. It's a fantastic grain because it's high in protein. It's very easy to cook, and you can use it as a replacement for rice or pasta. If you're buying pasta, you have options now. We have whole grain pasta. We even have pasta that's not made from the white flour or the semolina. It's made from lentils or chickpeas, and that could increase the fiber and protein of those products. So we always want to try and include these whole grains in the diet. Brown rice in place of white rice. Introducing perhaps bulgur. This is a fun grain to work with. It is wheat, but you don't have to cook it. You can pour boiling water over your bulgur, you cover it, let it sit 15 minutes, and then you fluff it, and that it can be used in place of rice. So it's another high fiber grain. There's so many to try. You can try amaranth and millet and teff. Many of these you can buy in small amounts in Whole Foods if you're looking to experiment with them. And we're going to talk in a little bit about how you can incorporate these into some recipes. So thinking in terms of whole grains, anytime you can get the whole grain bread or whole grain crackers, we are eating less of these on a Mediterranean diet. And so typically in a Western diet, we might have an English muffin at breakfast or a croissant breakfast sandwich or a bagel. At lunch, we might have a sandwich. At dinner, we might have some pasta. We get a lot of these carbohydrates and starchy processed grains in our diet, but they're not whole grains. And so that is a big differentiating factor when it comes to choosing correctly. So looking at protein foods, I did mention that the Mediterranean diet is low in animal products. So we think in terms of using plant proteins. So plant proteins can be anything from lentils, chickpeas, garbanzo beans, kidney beans. We also have soybeans and tofu. We have nuts. So those are important protein foods that can come from plant sources. We can eat some animal products. So we do eat poultry. So poultry is allowed on the Mediterranean diet. A serving would be 3 ounces, and you can have poultry twice a week. You're encouraged to have fish for protein 2 or 3 times a week. The fatty fish are encouraged. So those are your fish like herring, mackerel, sardines, salmon. Those fatty fish are high in omega-3s, and they are important in the cardiovascular benefits. We limit red meats, and here I've listed your red meats for you: beef, pork, veal, and lamb, to 1 serving or less per week. So it's important that we see that we are really limiting the animal products. Eggs are allowed, and it's suggested 2 to 4 per week. Dairy can also be allowed on the Mediterranean diet. It's low-fat dairy and 1 to 2 servings a day. So if you're having milk or yogurt, those are allowed, but they are in smaller amounts. So there is a limit on your consumption there. But remember that dairy contributes some important nutrients to the diet. You might be using dairy substitutes like oat milk, almond milk, or soy milk. Be sure that those milks are fortified. Some of them are low in protein. So a typical 8-ounce serving of milk would have 8 grams of protein. Almond milk might have 2 to 0. And so if you buy a fortified milk, they're usually adding vitamin A, vitamin D, and calcium. So it's important if you're using a plant-based milk that it's fortified. And this is very important. On the Mediterranean diet, we use olive oil to substitute for other fats. So those hard fats, butter, the fat on meat, all of those are reduced or eliminated on the Mediterranean diet. Trans fats are also not used on the Mediterranean diet. So trans fats were banned in 2015. They actually came off the generally recognized as safe list, so they could no longer be incorporated into our foods. For many years, they were in our foods. A hydrogenated fat or a trans fat is that can of Crisco you might remember seeing. And what they do is they chemically change the structure, so you have corn oil that goes from a liquid to a solid. In changing that structure, it has a longer shelf life. So when products are made like cookies or pastries or crackers, and they use the trans fats, they could stay on the shelf longer. So it gave them a longer shelf life. There was less food waste, and there was more likelihood that someone would buy that product, and it's cheaper, by the way. So now we don't have those incorporated in our diet, but they do come in from processed foods. And so using a Mediterranean diet, you're avoiding those types of fats that really lead to cardiovascular disease and insulin resistance. So now let's take a break and let's have a little test.
Yes, I'm gonna pull up a poll. So we are in our fiber question, and I'm gonna launch this quiz. You should see it in the middle of your screen.
Okay, which of these foods has more fiber? Is it 1 cup of broccoli rabe, 1 cup of sliced cucumber, 1 cup of snow peas, or 1 cup of cut asparagus?
Okay, let's give some time to respond. We have a couple, okay, it's jumping.
I see my
Do you
error.
see them?
Yeah, look at that. So,
We're almost there for everyone to have participated. Get your answers in now. Which will it be?
oh, there we go. Whoops. I'm having a little slide trouble here.
It's okay, we'll give us more time to answer our poll. We have a couple holdouts. Anyone want to finish guessing?
There it is.
Okay, ready if I end it?
Yep.
I will share the results.
Okay, so I see that my editing was not so good on this slide, but snow peas is the correct answer. It has 5.6 grams of fiber. And so I love to eat snow peas raw. They're one of my favorite foods to eat raw, and I do like to have them with hummus. So that's one way you might incorporate them. They're also fantastic in a salad, or you can saute them in a little bit of olive oil and have them as a side. Okay. Which of these has more protein? So
Okay,
thinking
number
in
two.
terms of
Sorry, Dr. Basedow just was launching number 2. You're good.
Okay, so thinking in terms of how you can incorporate more protein in your diet, we said that a half a cup of lentils would be a serving, and you could have quinoa as a source of protein. If you eat quinoa in a meal, that can be a meat replacement. We also have hummus or chickpeas. And your answer would be quinoa is the highest of all of those items. So thinking in terms of incorporating quinoa, you can put it into soups, you can put it into stews, you can make a salad with quinoa. So it is a rice or pasta substitute. All right, testing your knowledge on omega-3 fats. These are some foods that have omega-3 fats. Which of these would you consume to increase your intake of omega-3s?
The poll has launched. We see some results coming in. Ooh, this one's close. This one has a close tie.
Okay.
Okay, here are the results.
You would want to include the walnuts in your diet. You can include any of these in your diet and be very successful to have healthy fats. But if you were choosing how could you get your omega-3 intake up, you would want to have walnuts. Okay, which of these foods has more flavonoids? Flavonoids are a substance that we get from plants. They are protective to the plant, but actually when we consume the plant, it gives us some benefits. Some of these benefits are cardioprotective, meaning they're good for your heart. So which of these foods do you think would have more flavonoids?
Slowly
They
coming
all
in.
look like very tasty options.
This one has a clear winner, so we'll see if we're right.
Let's let's see. This one was tricky because this slide was edited and we have an opportunity to really test your skills.
Ooh, I think we're mostly in. Should I end it? Last call?
Okay.
Okay, results have been shared.
Yes, black tea it is. So I do drink tea. I will say on a typical day, I probably have 2 cups of tea, and that is a significant contributor to our flavonoids. And again, they are protective of our heart health. So now that we've learned a little bit about the Mediterranean diet, it's National Nutrition Month. What better time to start incorporating a change or two to get yourself onto this plan? So how can you connect with the Mediterranean style diet? So thinking about learning to cook your foods a little differently. So instead of frying with um, vegetable oil, you would switch to olive oil. You would use more olive oil in your food preparation, such as in your salads. And we did talk about olive oil being an important healthy fat. And I do want to mention that there are many grades of olive oil. So if you are able to purchase the extra virgin olive oil, this grade is the least processed. Extra virgin olive oil comes from the first pressing of the olives, and it's a cold pressing. So you are getting the highest quality and the most antioxidants from that oil. As the oil gets processed more, it gets processed with heat and sometimes with chemicals to extract more of the oils from the olives. And so those more processed versions of olive oil are lower in the antioxidants and protective properties. So if you have the option of purchasing that extra virgin olive oil, just know that there is a difference in how it contributes to your health. Okay, so 911, a Western diet recovery. Where do you start? So if you like to cook, there's an excellent opportunity to try new recipes, testing out new foods. So we talked about some grains you might not be familiar with. You can try, if you've never had quinoa, it's very easy to cook. Trying that in a new dish might be something that would inspire you. Looking online for some Mediterranean diet recipes. There are some great websites. One of my favorite is Olive Tomato. It's a dietitian who comes from Greece and she's trained in the US and she talks a lot about different recipes. You might be interested in trying some of those. You can make the Mediterranean diet culturally appropriate. As a matter of fact, on our last mission trip, one of my colleagues and I worked to find ways to teach people about a Mediterranean style eating pattern, even though we were in Jamaica. So what we did is we focused on those local fruits and vegetables that are grown in Jamaica, and we devised ways to educate people with fruits and vegetables that they recognized and incorporating more of those into the diet and teaching them about the colors of those foods. Because remember, having variety in the diet is also very important. So there are a plethora of colors that our food comes in. You know, we think about fruits and vegetables, everything from red, yellow, orange, green, blue, purple. We want to get more color into our diet. So challenging yourself to have a colorful plate. Swapping out meat for a plant-based protein, experimenting with that plant-based protein to see how you can use it and whether or not you like it. Because there are so many other alternatives to try on a Mediterranean diet, you're really not limited. And as I mentioned, another point of the Mediterranean eating style is that it's consumed as a meal with family. So socialization, eating with friends, sharing the lunchtime meal, having dinner as a family, taking that important time for calm and rest and nourishment. Think in terms of your food as nourishing your body. We can live to eat, that's the Western style, or we can eat to live, which is the Mediterranean style. And so thinking in terms of, you know, is that food going to help you? Is it going to move you forward toward your health goals, or are you eating a food that's going to hold you back from reaching those health goals? And starting with, you know, a few things at a time incorporated into your diet, maybe one meal a week. Maybe you go to one meal then a day, and you gradually start to make some of those changes. So I've included some recipe suggestions. This is one of my favorite recipes. I've become a fan of fennel. I particularly like it roasted. So you can roast it as a side dish for your meal. This is one way where you take the roasted fennel with the white beans and your olive oil, and you're going to put those into a food processor or a blender. You're going to season it with garlic and a little bit of pepper flakes and a little grated provolone, which you can leave out if you choose not to have an animal product in with your dip. But this is something that you can have with a whole grain cracker. You can have it with crudité. And it really is delicious. Fennel has a wonderful taste when it's roasted. And remember that also in the Mediterranean diet, we like to cook with lots of herbs and seasonings. These replace the traditional salt of a Western diet. So cooking with garlics and leeks and onions and scallions, using those seasonings that are readily available depending on the type of cuisine you're cooking. You have Italian cuisine with basil and oregano. You have Mediterranean versions of seasonings where you're using cumin and coriander. So that's how you change culturally, along with changing those local fruits and vegetables. And since we're talking about local fruits and vegetables, this is another important component of the Mediterranean diet. Many of the foods consumed in Mediterranean countries are obtained locally. So they're not traveling uniquely from other countries, but they are locally grown, and so they are consumed closer to where they're grown. They're not transported as far. The concept of eating as well in the Mediterranean countries, they are not shopping in the BJ's and the Costco's where they're buying in bulk. They tend to buy just what they need, and often they buy what they need for that day's meal. And so it is fresher, it is not held as long, and it is not as processed. So here's another recipe I really love. So this is an African recipe. It uses collard greens and sweet potatoes, tomatoes, and peanut butter. It is a delicious combination. These are foods you might not have thought to combine together. And there's also a spice blend used in Africa. It's called Burberry. You can buy it pre-mixed, or it's a season of about 8 different spices, the coriander, the cumins, the cinnamon, the allspice, and they add a really nice dimension to a stew. So this is a hearty stew, even though there's no meat in it. It has a deep flavor, and I would encourage you to experiment with it. There is teff in this recipe. Teff is one of those grains we talked about. You can swap out quinoa, or you can put bulgur. So you can make a swap based on your personal preference, or you can experiment with something new. But it really is a hearty seasonal kind of meal, and quite unique from a flavor perspective. And then this is another one of my Persian recipes. I really love the combination of persimmon and pomegranate, all of which are available here in the US thanks to transport. We get a lot of items from outside the US that are readily available. So you can find persimmon and pomegranate pretty easily. There's a unique seasoning here. It's called dukkha. It's made with pistachios, coriander, sesame, cumin, fennel. These are the fennel seeds, and black peppercorns. And it's garnished with mint. So thinking in terms of how these seasonings add flavor to foods without having our typical salt or salt substitutes. The dressing also is homemade with extra virgin olive oil. That's the Evo there you see. It's got a little bit of honey and some fresh lemon juice. So these are some really interesting ways to incorporate different styles of foods in the Mediterranean pattern. Or you can stick with the ones that you're most familiar with, and that would be perfectly fine. But remember, we're focused on getting the fruit and vegetable intake up. We're cutting out those unhealthy saturated fats. We're focused on using olive oil. We're seasoning our foods differently. And these are important concepts on a Mediterranean diet. So now we have time for some questions.
Dr. Basedow, we had a few come in through the chat, so I'm gonna just read those over about the presentation. So I'm gonna go from latest to earliest. So we talked about the ingredients in a couple slides ago. Where do you buy these ingredients?
So I'm wondering which ingredients you are referring to. So if it's fruits and vegetables, things like pomegranates and persimmons, I have found those in Publix. If you're talking about spices, so Publix has a pretty large selection of spices. I could find everything I'd need to make Burberry at Publix. If you live close to the Fort Lauderdale area, the Yellow Green Market has an amazing selection of spices as well. And they also have an even larger variety of those fruits and vegetables. So if you're able to get to a specialty market like that, they are available, but I would say you could do very well with Publix. They have quite a selection.
Is avocado oil a good choice?
Avocado oil is a good choice. So yes, we definitely want you to include avocados in your diet. It is not as um, highly ranked as olive oil, but yes, avocado would be an acceptable choice.
Is black tea better than green tea?
So that's an interesting question. The teas all come from the same plant, the Sinensis plant. And what's different about them is how the leaves are dried or handled. And so um, green tea does have some additional benefits. I'd have to look up the difference on the flavonoids, but either of those would be acceptable.
Is pork no longer the other white meat?
So the pork board does use that slogan a lot. I have considered it from the readings I've done in with the red meats, but think of it in terms of animal products. So our goal on the Mediterranean diet is really to reduce those animal products. So limiting yourself to those animal products would be consistent with the Mediterranean diet.
What about packaged microwave vegetables? Do they have less nutrients than fresh veggies?
So if you're talking about frozen vegetables, you want to read your ingredient list. There can be some benefits to frozen vegetables if there is nothing added to the frozen vegetable. They generally are picked at the peak of ripeness and then they're handled very quickly to freeze them. So they get blanched and frozen very quickly. And if they are used while they're still at their peak of freshness, so not holding that product too long, a fresh vegetable a frozen vegetable could be equivalent to a fresh. Remember, if that fresh vegetable is coming from somewhere outside of Florida, it's like a cut flower. The minute that gets cut, it starts to deteriorate. And so think of it in terms of your fresh flowers last about a week. So imagine we cut that broccoli and we're driving that broccoli from somewhere outside of Florida. By the time it gets here, it gets to Publix, it's put on the shelf, and then you buy it and you bring it home and you may cook it that day or the next day. A week could have gone by where you're losing the quality of that product. So, yes, we like to buy fresh and local for that reason, but you can use a frozen vegetable and have a good quality product that is nutritionally healthy.
Great. I want to take some time to move over to the questions that were asked in advance. So thank you to those who shared early upon registration. Dr. Basedow, did you want to stay with your screen on the questions or did you want to switch over to you? Your call, just wanted to let you know. As we potentially position to seeing your face as we ask these questions, great, awesome. Um, is the Mediterranean diet good for kidney health?
Yes. So, according to the kidney disease outcomes quality improvements, the Mediterranean diet is recommended for um, all stages of kidney disease 1 to 5. It is not recommended for dialysis or transplant because those patients, not that they can't be on a Mediterranean diet, but they have special nutritional needs that should be discussed with a dietitian. So there may be alterations that are made to a Mediterranean diet to make it appropriate for those people.
And would you recommend fasting with this diet?
So if the question is related to intermittent fasting can be done with any kind of diet. The intermittent fasting process changes how your body's metabolizing some of its fats. And so you can do intermittent fasting with a Mediterranean diet. And those are based on your personal health conditions and your personal needs. So I certainly would consult a dietitian. I don't recommend intermittent fasting for everyone, and so that's why I would refer you to a dietitian. So yes, it does have some benefits. It can be done with the Mediterranean diet, but your specific personal needs should be evaluated before you undertake that.
How do you ease into a new way of eating after 50?
Yeah, so it's we do get set in our ways. you would like to think about trying some new foods or taking a trip perhaps to a farmer's market, and finding things that appeal to you and taking them home and experimenting with them. If you like to cook, it's a great opportunity to try a new recipe, try some new seasonings, and don't be afraid to um, and and I would recommend, if you like soup, to start with soup because I think you can't cook soup wrong.
How would you fit in a new way of eating, like using the Mediterranean diet for a busy traveling lifestyle?
Yeah, so if you are traveling and you're consulting and you're on the road a number of days a week and you're eating out 3 meals a day, it does become challenging. But thinking in terms of that pattern, you can have a yogurt for breakfast one day with some fresh berries and some whole grain toast. The next day you can have your eggs, your scrambled eggs with some spinach and tomato and some avocado. Um, Lunch can be a salad, it can be a vegetable soup, dinner can be um, um, baked or grilled fish. So there are ways to take this pattern and make appropriate menu choices, even when you're on the road. But you have to stay away from those highly processed fast food restaurants. So and there are options out there. There are many options for travelers to make better choices, but you have to plan and do a little bit of research so you know not to go to Wawa to buy your food.
Wawa is very good. Is flaxseed also a good option of omega 3s?
Yes, flax seeds or flax meal. Flax meal can be added to cereals or smoothies, and you can even use flax in a substitution for eggs. So there's an opportunity there to reduce your egg intake. It's particularly if you're making a whole grain pancake and typically there are eggs in there, you can substitute some flax meal for one of those eggs in that recipe, and that reduces your egg intake.
We talked about fruits and vegetables, but is there other Mediterranean diet approved snacks to incorporate?
Lots of Mediterranean approved snacks. So hummus would be one of my favorite. Yogurt makes a great snack. Nuts, crudité, popcorn. So in our house, we actually use a little paper brown lunch bag and we take a quarter of a cup of kernels and put it in the bag. You fold it over and then put it in the microwave on the popcorn button, and it comes out to 3 cups of popcorn. So you have to be careful not to use too much because that bag only accommodates so much. But there's an easy way to make popcorn so it remains healthy. Some other snacks you can do an avocado chocolate pudding. There's trail mix, making a healthy trail mix, making veggie chips, doing a slice of multigrain toast with some mashed avocado and some chopped cucumber and tomatoes with a drizzle of olive oil. I like to make sweet potato toast where you slice the sweet potato and you put it in the toaster and then you top it with a little nut butter or some fruit chutney. So those are some great healthy snacks. I mentioned the snow peas. I gave you a recipe for the fennel dip. Lots and lots of options.
Do you have a favorite cookbook?
Do I? Oh, I do have a favorite cookbook. And it's been my favorite cookbook for about 30 years. It is the Victory Garden Cookbook. It talks to you about vegetables and how they're grown, how to cut them, how to handle them, how to store them, how to cook them, and it gives you recipes. And I would say, hands down, I've had that cookbook for a long time, and I've even had to replace it. So I do find it still available on certain websites.
Wow, well, everything sounded so amazing. And I want to be respectful of our time and yours, especially Dr. Basedow. So thank you again so much for taking the time to speak with us today and sharing your expertise. We do have a couple other questions, so I'm going to refer everyone to our post-event survey after this. So as we wrap up, I just want to take a moment to again celebrate Dr. Karen Basedow, but also this year. So this year marks the 10th anniversary of NSU's Masters in Nutrition program, as I mentioned at the top. Over the past decade, we've seen incredible growth. Our students have gone on to lead in their fields, contribute to groundbreaking research, and improve their lives through the power of nutrition. And if you didn't know, it all started with a roasted carrot. So, to continue this legacy, we invite you to support the NSU Nutrition Program Fund. Your generosity will help provide student scholarships and fund critical research, ensuring we can do even more in the years ahead. So, thank you again, and stay tuned for our follow up email where you can ask your questions and learn more. Until next time, take care, stay healthy, and go Sharks. Thanks again, Dr. Karen Basedow.